Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I see a couple of my friends, Phil Balponi and John Tabor. John was a parent at Myers Park High School when I was a principal at Myers Park High School. And I came and spoke to you all a couple of years ago, maybe probably 4 years ago, back when I was with Communities in Schools. And I'm still very involved in public schools. I began my career here in Charlotte a long time ago, back in 1976, as a teacher at Alexander Graham Junior High before it became a middle school. I was a teacher for 10 years. I was an assistant principal for 4 years. I was a principal, high school principal for 13 years, and spent 1 year as an assistant superintendent, which wasn't a great year. And then retired. The reason it wasn't a great year is because I didn't feel like I could really do anything. But then I retired and went to work in the nonprofit world. And I do need to tell you that one of the things that MeckEd does as an organization is we are the local champion for public education. And we didn't talk at all about a lead-in to what I do, but what you said reminds me of a story with Bob Morgan. Bob Morgan's the president of the Charlotte Chamber. And I was with Bob one day and he said, when we're recruiting new businesses to town, they always ask us 2 questions. The first question is, what's your airport like? And he goes, it's really easy to answer the question about the airport. And we've got a 4th runway, we've got the new rail lines, and the airport is a real draw. Second question is, what are your public schools like? And the answer is always, it depends on where you live. And depends on where you live basically means, you know, what's the zip code and where schools are located. I can tell you that does make a big difference. And historically, what's happened in CMS over the past 40 years has been quite unique, and for those of you who have been around, you've watched it. Where there was a Supreme Court case back in the 70s called Swan versus Board of Education. Swan versus Board of Education required our district to develop a student attendance system that mimicked our populations. So if we were 60% white, 40% black, then our schools were supposed to mimic that. And we did that for probably 15 years or so. And I can tell you, being a teacher at Myers Park back in the mid-'80s, that there was a time when Myers Park and West Charlotte were neck and neck. Academically, athletically, quality of teachers, but then other court cases took place, and it's been determined that schools cannot use race to determine what student attendance lines look like. So in essence, we have gone back to neighborhood schools. And I'm not here to say that neighborhood schools are good or bad, but I will tell you that as a former principal at a school that was a really good high school that had a lot of parents like John that really valued education, my job was a whole lot easier than was the principal at Garinger or the principal at West Charlotte, and that's still the case today. So we have kind of a 2-tiered system. And what MeckEd tries to do, we try to do a couple of things. We try to inform, educate, engage our community about public education. We try to do so in an objective and impartial way. But I'm here to tell you that I am not objective when it comes to public education. I'm a firm believer that public education is actually critical. It's a cornerstone for our democracy. And that without strong public schools, it is very difficult for the American dream to be a reality, unfortunately for a lot of poor kids. And I'm worried about some of the things I see happening that I feel like the American dream is about to become the art of memory for some kids. And so I'm not going to proselytize much more than that, but I'm going to talk a little bit about MeckEd. The picture behind me is a group of young women at Vance High School. And one of the programs that MeckEd has begun in this past year is called the Career Pathways Program. And we believe, based upon a report from the Harvard School of Graduation and the Harvard Business School, that we really need to think differently for a lot of students in high school. And that the 4-year college for all mantra is actually not the best way to go for a lot of kids. A lot of kids, we need to think post-secondary education for all. And post-secondary education means that while they're in high school, they need to have some workplace learning opportunities. These young women, we've developed a partnership with Carolina's healthcare systems where we have restarted something that went away due to budget cuts, where students actually have internships while they're still in high school. So these young women actually go to Vance High School, they get in their cars, they go down the street to Carolina's healthcare systems, University City Hospital. and they serve an internship there, and we're very excited about that. So let me talk a little bit more about MeckEd. See if this works. There we go. We have 3 programs. The first program is community engagement. I'll talk a little bit about that. We believe that it's really important to educate people in our community as to what's going on, and to do so in an impartial and objective manner, which has become a little bit more difficult recently. The Career Pathways program, these young women are an example of that. And we also do leadership development. We believe that it's critically important that we have the right people in certain elected positions. An example of that is yesterday we have these things called community conversations, where we talk about different topics. And yesterday was Board of Education 101. We had 2 former school board members, John Lassiter and Molly Griffin. We had 2 current board members, Marion McCrae and Tim Morgan. And then we had a gal, Ramona Miller, from the North Carolina School Boards Association, and someone from the Board of Elections to talk about, if you think you want to run for the school board, this is what it's all about. It was a really good discussion about that. So that's some of the other stuff that we do. Okay, here's some more pictures of the students that we work with at Advanced High School, and we just got funding for the 2nd position, which is at Harding High School. Again, this is called the Career Pathways program. And the Career Pathways program is mirrored after a Harvard Pathways to Prosperity report that says we need to think differently, and that we need to prepare a lot of students not for a 4-year liberal arts degree, but for something else that might be technical. It might be in banking, it might be IT. There are a lot of degrees out there, a lot of jobs today that don't require the traditional 4-year liberal arts degree. And I can tell you, as principal at Myers Park, most of my guidance counselors graduated with a 4-year liberal arts degree. So that's what they know. So we're working really closely with Central Piedmont. And Central Piedmont is such a gem in our community. They have tremendous programs, some that require a 1-year degree, some that require a 2-year degree. Students can get out, get a job, go to work at Siemens, making $40,000. Siemens is everybody familiar with Siemens? Siemens is German?
It's the German model.
It's the German model. And that's what Pathways to Prosperity says, that we need to think more like the Europeans, develop more apprenticeships for kids while they're in high school. There's an example on the right of a mechatronics program that Central Piedmont has in place. Students can go there for 2 years, get a degree in advanced mechatronics, go to Siemens, start out making $40,000 a year. And Siemens will pay for this. The program that we started is Advanced High School, Martin Luther King Middle School, and Martin Middle School, and the program just advanced to Harding University. And our whole goal is to, as I've already said this a couple times, is to change the culture, to change the way we think, because the jobs of the future are going to change. When I started teaching back in 1976, a lot of people stayed in their same career forever. As a matter of fact, where we are right now, I can remember back in '76, kids would drop out of school, they would come down here to this mill when it was operating, and they could get a job making $8 an hour, $9 an hour, and back then, $8 or $9 an hour was pretty good. You didn't need those skills. Those days are gone. This is obviously, the mills are gone. I don't think they're coming back. You need to have a specific skill set now to get a job. And if you're a high school dropout, it's even more difficult. The Career Pathways program really tries to define where kids need to go in the 21st century. And so we work very closely with the Chamber. We work very closely with an organization called Charlotte Works. Are you all familiar with Charlotte Works? Charlotte Works is the WIA workforce. They're in the old Coca-Cola building on Moorhead Street across from Northern Kitchen. And what they do is they try to help workers who are unemployed or underemployed get the skills they need to be to have what employers need in the workplace. We work very closely with them also. But at the end of the day, students need to have these workplace learning opportunities when they're in high school. And we are convinced that that's the future, and we're trying to help our businesses and industries understand that this is not charity, but it's really investing in the 21st century workforce. The other thing we do, these are the community conversations where we have these discussions. The one that you see here was a rather contentious discussion about breaking up CMS. There were people in the northern part of the county, there were some people in the southern part of the county that were not happy with the way things were going with CMS, and so they wanted to break up this big district of 159 schools into 3 separate districts. So what we did is we got a couple board members that are on one side of the fence, we got some community folks on the other side of the fence, and we brought them all together. We had an attorney from the Charlotte School of Law talk about the legalities of this, and you can see we had a pretty full house that day because that's a pretty hot topic, and everybody really behaved themselves too, which was wonderful. I felt my assistant principal skills were needed that day. This thing doesn't seem to want to click. Not sure why.
What was the upshot of that discussion?
The upshot of that discussion is the folks that wanted to break away actually did not fare very well. Someone came up to me afterwards and said, well, it looks like if you give them enough rope, they're going to hang themselves. It became very clear that they were only worried about their little communities. They weren't thinking about our community as a whole. I think the chamber and others came out and said that they were completely against this, that this would not help us as a community. Plus, the other thing that I think some of the folks thought about in the north and the south is that the majority of the tax base is in the middle of the city. Where the taxes are collected are a lot of the big buildings on Tryon Street. And so there just wouldn't be the tax base needed to break the district up. But there are a lot of people who've moved to Charlotte in the past 20 years that are from smaller communities up north where they do business very differently. There are cities that are school districts unto themselves, where you might have 5 schools. You have a high school, a middle school, and 3 elementary schools. You have your own school board, you have your own taxing authority, you have your own superintendent, and they love that because they can pick up the phone and call the superintendent who lives 2 blocks over. North Carolina does things a little bit differently. We have 100 counties, and our legislature, there are 114 school districts, but I think there are some who want it to be just 100. So we have this big, giant school district, and our superintendents over the past 2 superintendents have brought back those zone superintendent offices so people can answer questions more directly. Okay. Another thing that we do is we incorporate this thing called Poll Everywhere, where anytime we have an event, we ask people to bring their cell phones, because a lot of times in these community meetings, the loudest voice is the one that's heard the most. So what we do, we ask a few questions, and we ask you to break out your cell phone, and you just punch in a code, and then you punch in your answer. And so all the answers that people have roll out onto the screen. And so you really get a flavor of what everybody is thinking about, and you can remain anonymous. So we find that using that technology has really been helpful. Some of the topics have been CMS's Talent Effectiveness Project, which is their pay-for-performance plan. They don't like to use that language, but that's what it is. Common Core, the superintendent came and talked about a strategic plan, Board of Education 101, and we also brought in all charter schools. We had 2 different sessions. Charlotte now has 12 charter schools. Mecklenburg County has 12 charter schools. They're going to be adding 4 more next year, and the year after, there are 19 that have been approved. So charter schools are public schools, and they are on the scene to stay. And so what we wanted to do is have those leaders from the charter schools come and answer questions, clear up some misinformation that's out there. Those were also well attended. MeckEd Teachers of Excellence. Being a former principal, I had about 140 teachers at Myers Park High School. And I realized very quickly in my career as a principal that you better take care of your teachers. Because a happy teacher is a good teacher, and a good teacher takes care of their students. And teachers have really had it tough the past few years. There's some statistics nationally that are pretty scary. 50% of all teachers now leave the teaching profession within the first 5 years. And in our high poverty schools, 50% of our teachers leave the profession in the first 3 years. Pay is one of the reasons, but I think working conditions are another. And I also think that the way that we value the profession of teaching is taking some lumps too. So what we do is we have chosen the top 25 teachers in the district, and we have this really fancy event for them. We have a cocktail party, and a sit-down dinner, and they all get a plaque, and we cheer for the teachers, and they really are great teachers. But we also use this event to talk about why it's important for us as a community to invest in teachers and how important it is as a profession. So that's one of our events that we do. We do another event. Let's talk about that. We do another event called What's Possible in Public Education, and this is a community-wide breakfast that takes place in September, and the reason for this is for us to talk about why we can't stand still with reform, why it's so important for us to transform public education to make it more effective. We can't keep teaching kids the way we did back in the 1950s. And if you walked into some classrooms today, you might still think you're in the 1950s or the 60s, and we need to think differently. And we brought this guy in, Steve Perry's his name, I don't know if you've ever seen him on CNN, but whoo, was he provocative and controversial. We didn't know how provocative and controversial he was going to be, but people seemed to like it. It was one of those things where I was like, oh God, is CMS ever going to like me again? Because he kind of lit into the way we do business today. We're going to be doing this again in September, and our speaker is this guy from Google. His name is Jamie Cassett, and he's called their Google's education prophet. So he's going to come talk about how education needs to change, how important technology is, how we need to think about the blended classroom, the flipped classroom. There are a lot of changes happening in the world of education, and technology is driving a number of them. I already talked about all this. This is something we do every week also. I talked about how we inform, educate, and engage. We do a weekly e-newsletter, and I might add that we are a staff of 4. There are 4 of us in the office, and then I've got the 2 folks that are out in the schools. And we do this weekly e-newsletter, which is intended to provide our readers, we have about 4,000 people that subscribe, about what's going on in education locally, statewide, and nationally. We also have these interactive data maps that are Google Maps that basically list every school in CMS, elementary, middle, high school, all the charter schools. They talk about test scores, graduation rates, attendance rates, and just a number of data points. And we have found that these are extremely popular, and they're probably most popular with realtors, because people really want to know about those zip codes, where the good schools are. And that has been a very popular thing for us also, and I hope you'll sign up for it. We don't ask for money. It's free. It comes every Wednesday at 10 o'clock in the morning. And we did some research with Google. When's the time that people most likely open things up? And it was Wednesday morning. Never send something out on Friday afternoon, because everybody just hits delete.
That's good to know.
And there it's www.mecked.org. So that's basically who we are, what we do, and I'm happy to take any questions if you'd like. Yes, sir.
Would you comment on the legislative proposals to change the classroom size and about the qualification of the charter school teachers?
The 2 different bills that he's talking about. The first one is one that made it through the Senate this week about giving school districts flexibility on class size. School districts are supposed to adhere to a certain number of students, K-3, 4-6, 4-5, 6-8, and then 9-12. And that means that classrooms, if they're smaller, their students are going to get more attention. And that bill allows districts to have flexibility in how they staff their classes. Well, I can tell you that, first of all, since the recession came, those regs haven't been followed very well anyways. You're not supposed to have more than 31 students in a high school classroom. I can tell you in Myers Park High School there were probably 50 classrooms that had 35 to 40 students. John can probably vouch for me on that. And there are oftentimes the higher level kids. I actually support that. And the reason why I think it's a good bill is because it gives school leaders and school districts some flexibility. I'm not saying that we should have 28 kids in a kindergarten or a first grade class, but I think giving the districts that flexibility is a good thing. About the charter bill, there are a lot of different bills out there for charters right now. The playing field's not really level for charters versus traditional public schools. There was a bill that was introduced that only half the teachers in a charter school would have to be certified. I think that's ludicrous. I think that's a really bad bill. I have a real problem with that. They're also, part of that bill was that charter school operators would not have to do background checks on their teachers either. I find that to be frightening. Not doing a background check on the teacher who's going to be your children, that's worrisome. That's one of the things we do also is we follow the bills that are coming out and we kind of talk about them. There are a lot of changes taking place right now.
Any resistance to going towards the German model? Any resistance?
The question is there any resistance in going toward the German model? I really don't think there is, but the biggest hurdle in going towards the German model is with business and industry. Business and industry, HR folks aren't yet comfortable with having 16 and 17-year-old kids in their plants. They're worried about risk. Whereas in Europe, you have the federal government working with the public schools, working with industry in a triangle where they realize that this isn't charity for the schools, this is developing your 21st century workforce. So getting our business, Siemens is a German company, Siemens gets it. And so Siemens has gone to some of the high schools around their plant and they're giving these kids these great opportunities. I mean, it's phenomenal what Siemens has done. There are about 12 other German and Austrian companies are part of an initiative called Apprenticeship 2000 that works great. Bloom is one. It works terrific. So we have to get our American companies, I think, to understand that you need to think a little bit differently and it's not charity.
They just have to sign a whole promise because they're afraid of the attorneys.
Say that again?
They need to get them to sign a whole promise because they're probably afraid of the attorneys.
I wish it were that simple. It's not quite that simple. We have to actually go through employment agencies and they take care of the risk. And it costs about $1 or $1.50 an hour per kid.
Something in between.
Yes, yes. That's happening. But just the changing of the guard is somewhat challenging. Yes, sir.
Do you do any work with Khan Academy?
Do we do any work with Khan Academy?
Was it relevant?
Are you all familiar with Khan Academy? Khan?
No.
Khan Academy is one of the best things that has happened to education. This guy, I don't know his first name, his last name is Khan. Salman Khan, he used to work for Google. And he started developing these little 5-minute, 10-minute lessons on a number of different topics. And he's got this kind of soothing voice. And so if you wanted to learn something about algebra or geometry or chemistry, they're very specific lessons. And it's been hugely successful. And it's free. It's called the flipped classroom. It's called blended learning. This is the changes that are taking place in education. What the Khan Academy does is it asks students the night before to go online at home and watch a lesson. And the lesson might be 10 minutes, it might be 15 minutes. And what it does is it plants the concept. They start practicing it a little bit. When they come into the classroom the next day, the teacher is more of a facilitator than a teacher, and they go through guided practice. I'm convinced that that's a big part of the future of education, and it's been very successful. But one of the challenges with things like the Khan Academy is you have a lot of veteran teachers that don't know how to do that. They're not as comfortable with the technology. So how are we going to provide professional development for our teachers? That's another challenge. The Common Core Standards, are you all familiar with those? Common Core Standards are the new national curriculum that's coming out, and 46 of the 50 states have adopted it. America has never until now had a national curriculum. That's one of the reasons why China and Korea and some of these other countries are just wearing us out, because they have these national curriculums, the same standards, where we have different standards for different school districts. So the Common Core is going to be tough, and I'll predict in the next few years you're going to see reading and math scores nationally drop. But the reason they're going to drop is because the standards have increased, and we're going to have a standardized curriculum across the nation, which is a good thing. But teaching all those teachers how to use this technology, you know, kids today, I know you say kids today, they're on these things all the time, and they are, but it is the future. The technology is the future. There's a lot of good that comes with it. Khan Academy is a terrific way to help teaching live.
If you had to grade Charles Mecklenburg schools at this point in time, what would you say what would you grade them? What do you feel their failings are, what their strengths are?
If I was to grade CMS, what kind of grade would I give them? That's a tough question. What are their strengths and what are their weaknesses? I think probably the biggest strength right now is that they have a superintendent who is very dynamic. He's very realistic. He's a really good listener. CMS right now has to rebuild trust. Trust was pretty well shot. The last superintendent came on with everybody loved him for the first 4 years, but in the last year, that wasn't quite the case. He angered a lot of different groups and stakeholders. So I think the new superintendent, I give him an A for listening and effort and getting out there. Where is it weak? It's weak with us not being able to hang on to teachers. I mean, teachers are the key, just like in your businesses, it's your employees. You have to have a strong cadre of teachers who truly believe in what they do, feel very strongly about it, and don't feel like they're getting kicked to the curb a lot. So until we solve the teacher thing, I have some pretty grave concerns. What happens in Charlotte, what happens in CMS, is teachers know where the schools are, where they have a very large population of parents that support what they do, that value education, and teachers want to go to those schools. And when they get in those schools, they stay. The challenge we face is how do we get some of our best leaders and some of our best teachers to work in some of our most challenging schools and to stay there. Teach for America is an organization, a nonprofit, that I think is terrific. They get a lot of grief from some people, even from some teachers, because most of the kids that go there only stay for 2 or 3 years. But what they do in that 2 or 3 years is pretty fantastic. But what can we do to convince those bright young kids to stay in teaching? And why do you think they leave? Pay is one. They get treated poorly.
Discipline, lack of discipline.
Lack of discipline, but you'd be surprised. I mean, I had some teachers that worked for me, little ladies about this tall. You could walk in there and you could hear a pin drop. Discipline is all about procedures and about expectations. Then you have other big hulking coaches sitting back in the room and don't do anything, and kids are going wild. I mean, it's about procedures, and it's about, I'm really concerned that we have to do more to keep our good folks and make the teaching profession an attractive career, and as a community support teachers. And that's what we try to do with that Teachers of Excellence. I never answered your question because I don't think it's fair. You know, different schools have different challenges. Ardrey Kell has very different challenges than West Charlotte High School. Ardrey Kell has a 93% graduation rate. That means 93% of their kids that start the 9th grade, 4 years later graduate on time. West Charlotte has a 54% graduation rate. You walk through the halls of West Charlotte, you see their kids with all kinds of issues that the kids at Ardrey Kell don't have. So it's a reflection of our society and our community.
I mean, relative to other similar populations, are we doing better than Carries or Raleigh?
We are, well, we're actually, the question was, compared to other districts like us, how are we doing? Well, we're really pretty different than Wake County. We're about the same size. Wake County's about 5,000 students more than us. But Wake County only has a population of kids that are deemed to live in poverty at about 25%. Charlotte's 52%. So we have a lot more kids who are poor. And the way that those numbers get calculated is kids who are eligible for reduced lunch. And the number might even be higher because those are self-reported numbers. So there are a lot of kids that don't want to report it. 52%. Yes, Bill.
Bill, what are some of your ideas about how, the biggest issue in education, public education, is this definition of teacher success and how to define, and you've had the controversy around nationally too much emphasis on test scores, which have kind of become now the Atlanta issue that is a terrible injustice to public education, and particularly kids involved there. What are some of the maybe key metrics beyond testing that can be used by educators to help?
It's a great
evaluate
question. Does everybody know what happened in Atlanta?
Yes.
Yeah, cheating. It was big, and they got caught. So the question is, how do we measure teachers? And I mentioned in one of our community conversations, we had CMS come up and talk to us about the Talent Effectiveness Project. The Talent Effectiveness Project, which is a mouthful, was about 200 teachers that got together on their own time and volunteered about what matters most to measure an effective teacher. And there's 6 or 7 multiple measures. Testing is one of them. But I believe that testing is about 15 or 20%. Other things like, how are you perceived by your colleagues? What are the extra things that you do at school? How do your students perceive you? I was kind of a maverick when I was at Myers Park, and I asked the superintendent to allow me to have my students to evaluate the teachers. And it was kind of, oh, I don't know if we can do that. I said, we'll pay for it, our PTO pay for it, and we know we can't measure every single class, but every teacher will have at least 2 of their classes measure them. And the results that we got from the students were right on the money. I mean, the kids will tell you everything you want to know. Now, I'm not sure elementary school students would be able to measure the effectiveness of their teachers, but we need to listen to the student voice. That was really helpful. When I would go back to department chairs and say, Mrs. D over here isn't thought of so well by her students, and we get more discipline referrals from her than anybody else in your department. How can we work with her? How can we help her? So I think there's several things we need to look at, but I think teachers can tell us a lot. It needs to be multiple measures, though. It can't just be test scores. Thank you.
Last question. Do you think that it makes sense, since charter schools, the KIPS and the Sugar Creek Charter School have been so successful with handling poverty, low to moderate income kids, does it make sense to just outsource that demographic to those providers like that, who just seem to have different mousetrap? Going back to, we have to teach these kids differently.
Great question. And we have 12 charter schools in Mecklenburg County. And you've clearly done your homework, because the 2 you mentioned are, in my opinion, the 2 best. Sugar Creek Charter and KIP. KIP is part of a national charter school movement called Knowledge is Power. Sugar Creek is homegrown. Sugar Creek's been around about 11 years. They both had tremendous success. And CMS actually works with them, and they're sharing best practices with some of the CMS high poverty elementary schools that are also having great success. I think there's much from CMS to learn from them, and they can also learn from CMS. But the Sugar Creek Charter does some things that aren't rocket science. Like, they teach character development. It's age appropriate, how they expect kids to behave. All the kids wear uniforms. You never hear anybody screaming. The teachers rarely leave there. They also do something that I think is really clever, where they do 45 minutes a day for every kid, K-8, where they either accelerate them or they remediate them in particular areas. So every kid has this individualized plan in place. I'm a real big fan of Sugar Creek, but I'm also not a fan of some other charter schools that I won't name today that choose to be very exclusive in how they pick their children. And you're thinking, well, wait a minute, they're public schools. Don't they take all kids? No, they don't. They don't. If you don't provide transportation or food service, the poor kids can't come to your charter school. So that's one of the big problems with the charters, that they're able to use your public dollars, and they're able to be exclusive rather than inclusive. So there's a lot of things still to be worked out, and there's a lot of, in my opinion, some unfairness in the way things are done. But I do think that groups like Sugar Creek, and I'll tell you, 3 years ago, CMS didn't want to talk to Sugar Creek. And there was a lot of animosity. That's changed. Our new superintendent, you'll hear him talk more and more about choice, that he's done all these surveys, find out what parents want, and those are the kind of schools he wants to make. This Waddell